the most advanced mammoth hunters and some of the most advanced hunter-gatherers that is how I peg the Mycenaean culture 18,000 years ago in what's now Ukraine. They did a lot of things that we should respect them for. Darn sure don't need to be calling them scavengers ever again. I've already described their meat processing, vertically integrated, just-in-time manufacturing, water-powered production line. They're more like industrialists than they are scavengers. This culture produced at least 3 ivory process charts, and they're at least 17,000 years old. Those documents, and they're documents, those writings, and they are writings, predate the Egyptian hieroglyphs and cuneiform and any pictographic writing system by about 10,000 years. These mammoth hunters may have been at the very dawn of history. History is defined by documents that record something of the past, and that's what these process charts do. Now, a couple of them aren't that fancy. They're just crude scratchings, but they do portray the docking, the butchery, the smoking, and the storage in elevated meat caches that was the basis of their economy. So, these 3 process charts were created, in one case, 400 kilometers apart from each other. And the last one I found is 100 kilometers from Mezerich. So these people were clearly part of a unified system, a unified culture. They all did it the same way. I mean, it was too efficient not to do it that way. Imagine how efficient it was compared to nomadic hunting for you to get the mammoth to come to your settlement rather than chase a mammoth into the boondocks and have to cut it up and waste half of it and bring it back to your settlement if you had a settlement or if you're nomadic. These were sedentary mammoth hunters, and that's unusual. They don't fit into the hunter-gatherer foraging type very much, and they don't fit in the early agriculturalist sedentary mode. They're in their own advanced mode, but they were hunter-gatherers. They hunted and they gathered. I don't know what plant foods they gathered, but I guarantee you they gathered them. There are plenty of berries and nuts and seeds out there, even in the Ice Age. So we've also got a civilization, if you want to call it that, had early dog domestication, and I suspect early dog sled invention, because they spent, months of every year on frozen rivers. And that would be an excellent place to invent dog sleds. And you could go up and down the rivers, work your trap lines, you get furs, and a lot of these places took a lot of furs. And they loved Arctic fox. Arctic fox is the warmest fur in the world. So, you know, I'm impressed by these people, and the stuff they could make out of the mammoth would just it'd blow your mind to hear all the a list of everything they made. Now, another efficiency was that 100% of the mammoth carcass was brought in relatively pristine condition right to their settlement. And archaeologists call or refer to the schlep effect, which is the amount of meat and fat that gets wasted as you're hauling it around or hauling it back to your settlement. Zero schlep effect. Zero. And we know they had division of labor because everybody had their own jobs. It's very likely that most of the band or tribe or group participated in hunting and in the meat processing. Because just to butcher that thing probably took everybody involved. It wasn't a job. And maybe the kids carried stuff too, you know. They probably carried it in baskets, and they were pretty good at baskets. And this area had early eyed needles, and they created winter clothing out of wolves and Arctic foxes, and maybe a wolverine or two if they could get it. And maybe reindeer hide, you know, we don't know. But they definitely had to be dressed for the environment. And on these frozen rivers, they could go to one settlement or another in just a day or two. Because a dog sled on a frozen river goes fast compared to any other form of transportation in that era. So, you know, people assume that when the weather got really cold in the Ice Age, they would go south. But it's possible that when it got really cold, they went north to where the river stayed frozen longer and made a living out of their sleds, you know, or built settlements or whatever. I don't know. But the domesticated dogs in the Mycenaean culture predated the first dogs in the Russian Arctic by like 9,000 years. So it looks like they definitely were on the leadership of dog domestication. They had all kind of artwork, and you know, the Venus sculptures, people are trying to figure out why they always did these, you know, fat ladies that look pregnant or overweight or whatever. And the best article I've read is by a scientist or a doctor, and I think it's in the journal Obesity. And these scholars write that the Venus sculpture was a sign or a symbol of the extra nutrition that women needed in that era to conceive, make it through pregnancy, and make it through nursing in times of, you know, maybe acute food shortages. And the Venus figurines was the entitlement to extra nutrition by the person that held that item. And they think it was passed down from mother to daughter. But they measured how big they were compared to how far away from the glacier they were. And, you know, the closer to the glacier, the larger and more rotund these Venus figurines tended to be. So I buy that theory because it makes sense. And you're all, you know, in the Ice Age, nutrition was everything. Now, there is one aspect of these mammoth hunters, and it hadn't been fully understood yet, but periodically these sites were abandoned. And they're not sure how long they were going. Estimates range 20, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years maybe. But you can't judge it by the radiocarbon dates because those dates are all over the map. And there's been a lot of problem with radiocarbon dates. I've come up with my idea that they can count the number of mammoths, divide by 3, and that is the approximate number of years they stayed there. Because a dozen of these hunters only needed one big mammoth a year. And if there were 30 of them, they probably only needed 3 mammoths a year, depending on how big the mammoths were. And so, they didn't spend that much time hunting mammoths. They spent more time processing mammoth carcasses, processing meat, making tools. I made all kind of tools out of the bones and the ivory. So this system lasted from 25,000 to 30,000 years. It's like the longest running business model in the history or prehistory of the world. But they couldn't just stay in one place for a whole millennia. And the climate was up and down. When it got really cold, they pulled out of there, I think. And it could be something like, after about 20 years, the mammoth matriarchs figured out they were there and avoided their stretch of river. That could be one reason. But we really don't know how long they stayed in any one settlement. But somehow they kept the knowledge from generation to generation. Or it was just obvious that, best place to kill them is in the river, and if you can smoke them, that's even better. If you can float them down, that's even better. There were a couple of sites in Central Europe that made about as many mammoths as the ones in what's now Ukraine, but not quite as many. And I think that this special combination, this system of riverine hunting and meat processing and storage, it reappeared when all the conditions were appropriate and there. And they were dependent on the mammoth herds too. And the mammoth herds changed their ranges periodically with the climate. So anyway, I'll hopefully provide some more videos to provide more information about these fairly remarkable mammoth hunters that lived about 18,000 years ago. And I thank you for listening to this one.